So you've got a kid, or maybe you're the fun uncle or aunt or the cool grandparent and want to introduce them to video games. Well, here's your chance. This is the top 7 games to introduce kids to gaming. Now, you may be a bit worried because I tend to make a lot of traps in the shows, like the date one. I promise you that this isn't a trap. I'm not gonna recommend Postal to anyone. This is a well-meaning, well-intentioned show where I will recommend some games that you can safely give to a child that they may enjoy and they may actually learn something from them and grow up to be a normal, rational human being. Not the screams obscenities through a microphone in Counter-Strike or types mean stuff in League of Legends chat or, you know, the kind of kids that play video games today, don't you? This is a show made specifically to avoid that. It's a show made so that your children will grow up to be wholesome human beings and maybe a bit snobbish when it comes to video game quality. That can be avoided. But before we start, I'd like to mention 2 very important things. I'm not gonna recommend Minecraft. It's a great game, it's a nice game. Its community is utter cancer and should not be something that a child is exposed to if you want them to grow up and not be an absolute shame upon your family. Second thing, I'll not be recommending any Nintendo games because, well, for one, Nintendo, just by mentioning their name, probably already claimed this video and they will copyright strike it if I put a single screenshot of their games in it. And 2, do your best to not make your kids subservient to big, gigantic, evil corporations. Nintendo cultivates a cult of personality that very easily influences people, and you do not want that. Which is also a reason why I'm not gonna be recommending, and even though this kind of pains me, Lego Star Wars. It's a very fun game to play, but it's also kind of a multimedia gigantic juggernaut that you should kind of stay away from. Avoid the Disney stuff too, unless you want your kid to grow up as a slave and perpetuate the culture of, well, cultural slavery to big corporations. Okay, with that settled, let's get started. Number 7. Sam and Max. I would have put Monkey Island here, but I recommended Monkey Island already 2 shows ago, and I don't want to repeat myself all that much. But yeah, you can put Monkey Island here as well. Even though it's now owned by Disney, they don't seem to know they own it, so it's fine. It's absolutely fine. Now, why Sam and Max? Well, it's a cartoon that you get to play. And when I say a cartoon, I mean a cartoon like in the good old days. When cartoons didn't look like absolute, well, you know what they look like now. They were funny without relying on memes, and they were, well, pleasant, clever, fun, and you get to play as 2 of the main characters of a cartoon. An anthropomorphical dog detective that wears clothes and a hat, and a slightly insane rabbit. Now exactly which version of Sam and Max you want them to play, that's up to you. Sam & Max Hit the Road is maybe a bit darker, even though it's the most comical and the most cartoony one, but the Telltale ones also are very, very good. They're also kind of a bit easier, and because of their episodic nature, they may be not as difficult to get into as the old ones were. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that, again, these are cartoons like in the old days, but unless you're American, I don't think there is much issue about telling your kids that it's not okay to get on top of the car while driving on the freeway so they could surf. If your child has problems distinguishing reality from fiction, well, games are not gonna make their life easier, I'm sorry to say that. Especially in the case of Sam and Max, because there may be some points where things get a bit violent, like comedically violent, but again, it's not something that's negative. It's the same kind of cartoon violence you used to see in Tom and Jerry, you used to see in Roadrunner, and the people that watched those didn't turn out to be insane or criminals or deadly masterminds contemplating the domination of the world or something. So for the most part, Sam & Max is a safe game. It's fun, it's funny, it's creative, and depending on which version you play, you may even have some lessons to learn from those games. Number 6. The Settlers. Exactly which Settlers you want them to play, that's a bit up to you. I recommend Settlers 2, but Settlers 7 is also a really good one to try out. The basic idea is that you want to show your kids that games are not just all about shooting stuff or quonking stuff on the head with a mallet. They can also be about building things, about managing things, about giving orders to people and having them efficiently implement your vision. And the Settlers games are really good at that. They're not overly complicated. This isn't going to be something that's going to give them problems. I would have recommended Pharaoh, but Pharaoh is a bit too hard for someone that's just starting out in video games. Settlers, on the other hand, is a good starting point. You've got a very basic building scheme, you have a very basic economical chain, you have what is in essence a very basic game about managing a settlement. There is combat in it. Well, there is combat in it if there are maps that require combat. A lot of them don't, so you can pretty much sidestep that whole affair of violence and stuff. But even though there are fights in the game, they're usually very comedic. Like, some of them just result in screaming and then skeletons and angels appearing. So it's not something that can traumatize a child. This is not Mortal Kombat, if you're wondering. It's far, far from it. Now, I would recommend Mortal Kombat, but my sister-in-law would strangle me. Number 5, Red Alert 2. Now, in a way, this is a more violent video game because it is a war game, but it's not a gory war game. It's not violent for the sake of violence. It's not a game that glorifies murder like a Mario game would. It's a game where you control a few units, you build a base, you gather resources, and you build an army and then do your best to win. There are two main reasons why I recommend Red Alert 2 over other RTS games, even over StarCraft, which is in some ways a much better game. Approachability and sensibility. Red Alert 2 has an easy to understand interface, very easy to understand controls. You just click and things happen. It's got a very easy to understand way in which all the units work. It's not a micro-intensive game, at least at first in single player, and sensibility comes in the form of it just being a bit more leaning towards a comedy with its more campy style. It's not overly serious. Well, it is. It's kind of serious. I mean, it's nuclear war, but it treats it with a certain sense of lightheartedness that makes it not seem like you're committing war crimes or something by mind controlling cows and putting explosives on them. I would have actually really wanted to put Warcraft 2 here, but the game is kind of janky to play right now. I mean, after all these years, it's not maybe the most approachable one, and Blizzard doesn't care about actually making a remake. Well, they said they tried and it didn't work, but honestly, they could have tried more. It would have worked, just saying. And Warcraft also had the advantage of being more of a cartoon, which Red Alert 2 also has over StarCraft or other RTS games. Number 4, Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time. This game is absolutely superb. It is magnificent. It is a fairy tale. It is an action game. Yes, that is undeniable. There is action that involves fighting and killing in it, but you're not killing people for one. That's well, kind of hard at the beginning though, which is why you may want to be the one that's playing that part. Just play until they get to the Dagger of Time, because once they get to Dagger, that's when the game becomes super duper interesting. That's when the game absolutely can hook them. Because here you have a game that's about jumping, it's about running, it's about platforming, it's about figuring out navigation in 3D space with a combat system that is nice and involves a very interesting mechanic in the form of the Dagger of Time, which lets you rewind time to correct mistakes. It's something that will attract the player, the kid, because it'll be something novel, something new, something interesting. Though since this is probably one of their first games, everything would be novel to them. Still, it's a great game, not just because of its gameplay, but also because of its aesthetic and its story. It's a very simple story actually, but it's well told, it has good characters, and it is like a fairy tale, a good one that may help children understand certain concepts like self-sacrifice, like being a good person, like not trusting the vizier, and many other things. It's also a very good game. Number 3, Divinity Original Sin. Now this is your chance to actually get in the game with them, because this is a co-op game, or you can let them play by themselves with both characters characters, or 4 of them when they get more party members, but I recommend starting off with them so you can teach them the ropes. Divinity Original Sin is not a difficult game to understand. It is highly approachable, but there is depth to it. And the reason I'm recommending this over something like Baldur's Gate, apart from the fact that it has co-op in it, is the more light-hearted tone. The more upbeat, the more funny fantasy elements to it, like talking clams, talking dogs, stuff that's not about cosmic horrors of gods of murder. Sure, they'll get to those eventually, when they're a bit older maybe, or tomorrow, because Baldur's Gate's a good game, but Divinity Original Sin is a good starting point. The writing is good enough, depending on which version you play, the standard or the original, the story may be more or less interesting, but the most mileage they'll get out of this game will be from just going through the world and doing stuff, having fun, making mischief even, teleporting their characters from place to place, doing kooky side quests, and reading a lot of dialogue because there is very little voice acting in this game. Also, the combat system is amazing. You may need to help them learn it a bit, but once they understand it, they will spend quite a lot of time just enjoying it, because again, it's one of the best combat systems ever made in a turn-based tactical RPG. They can even play it with friends, again because it has co-op both online and offline. So it's pretty much one of the best RPGs you can get them to play. And again, because it has stuff like talking wells, you pretty much won't get anything that's inappropriate for children. Apart from all the murder. Lots and lots of murder. But where would be the fun of throwing a fireball if it didn't actually harm anybody? Number 2. Ultima Underworld. This may not be one of the easiest games to play if your child has been exposed to things like, well, interfaces made within the last 20 years. But I highly recommend Ultima Underworld because it'll teach them what good game design looks like without graphics being a factor. Heck, if you start them out with Ultima Underworld, they won't know that the graphics are 20-something years out of date. To them, it'll look like it's shiny and new and amazing. Yes, the controls require a bit of getting used to them, but once they do understand how to move, they will find a very interesting game. One that will actually serve to teach them certain concepts of morality. And what do I mean by this? Well, the first other creature you meet in the game is a rat. Now, if this were any other role-playing game, that rat would attack you and you would have to kill it. But this is Ultima Underworld. It's a game that from the onset tells you that even a rat, even a creature that is normally the first thing you kill in a game, is not hostile towards you. That rat will only become hostile if you steal from him. Otherwise, it'll go on doing its ratty business, ratting on, not paying attention to what you do, living and let living. And that's a valuable lesson to teach someone, that not everybody's out to get them. The first human you meet in the game, also, you talk to them. You don't attack them. Well, you can if you're evil, but that's not what the avatar would do. That's not what you should do. I would have recommended actually Ultima 4, but it is way harder to get into than Ultima Underworld. Well, for today's kids. There sadly isn't a sort of a more modern-ish, easier to play with better interfacing controls, but still maintaining the same level of moral philosophy version of the series. So Ultima Underworld is a good place to start. And number 1 is Star Control 2. As I've mentioned in the show dedicated to this game, I deeply regret not playing it as a kid. Again, the graphics are a bit outdated. It's basically a 2D game, but it's a fantastic game. It's colorful, it's funny. Once you meet the Spotty, you're just in love with this game because they're so silly, they're so quirky, they're an alien species afraid of everything. And they even have voice acting in some versions of the game, like the Urquan Masters version. But they're not the reason why I'm recommending this game. It's because Star Control 2 is a masterpiece of design. It's a masterpiece of sci-fi writing. This is a game where you travel through part of the galaxy, exploring, meeting new creatures that are different to you. And not just different that they look different, they behave differently, they think differently, they are completely alien, and that can really have a positive effect on a child. Like, they meet something that is so unlike them, and this game requires them to understand that species because they need help to fight the Urquan. They need the assistance of everyone in the galaxy to accomplish their goal of freeing Earth. And they do this not through violence, well, sometimes through violence, but not always, but they do it mostly through forming relations, through dialogue, through helping others, through explaining to some people that maybe you should learn to code better before sending out probes that start killing everybody. And most of all, Star Control 2 will undeniably make your child an absolute snob when it comes to video games, because it is just incredibly well crafted. And it's not hard to play. It's easier to play, I would say, than Ultima Underworld, especially if you don't run into the problem of the combat mode running at 1000 frames a second. It's also free, like the Urquan Masters is absolutely free, so there is no reason to not let your child try Star Control 2, and it wouldn't hurt if you pressed them to play it even if they didn't like it at first glance. They will thank you decades later. So closes this edition of the top 7 best games to introduce children to gaming with, or something like that. I'd also like to give a few special mentions to Roller Coaster Tycoon and its more modern sequel-ish thing called Planet Coaster, Sid Meier's Pirates, the Dizzy games, the Incredible Machine games where you made the Rube Goldberg devices, and again, keep them away from Counter-Strike, League of Legends, Dota, and the Minecraft community. And GTA, oh god, so not let them play GTA Online or GTA San Andreas multiplayer. Basically nothing with multiplayer, avoided as the plague, which is why I had a hard time of recommending Rocket League as well, which is, under other circumstances, a great game. Goodbye.